Welcome to AI in Real Life, real talk with real experts, brought to you by the AI Institute for Societal Decision Making. I'm Katy, your host and an undergraduate at Carnegie Mellon University. Today, we're on site at the inaugural AI STM workshop for human AI teaming, exploring how artificial intelligence is shaping our world and the decisions we make every day. Today, we're joined by Professor Michael Lee from UC Irvine, a Chancellor's Fellow in the Department of Cognitive Sciences. Hi, Michael. It's a pleasure to have you with us
Hi,
today.
Katy. It's really nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me along.
Yeah, could you start by briefly introduce yourself and your lines of research?
I'm a cognitive scientist. I've been at UC Irvine for about 20 years. I originally came from Australia. I work on computational modeling, and I guess there are three main research areas I work on. One is the wisdom of the crowd, which is, I think, one of the reasons I'm at this workshop. Another one is in human decision making, which is also very relevant to the workshop. And a third one that's maybe a little less relevant here is I work on measuring human memory, especially in clinical problems, so as people get Alzheimer's and so on. And I guess the other thing I'm best known for in the field is that I use Bayesian methods in my research a lot, and sometimes do straight sort of statistical work on research methods that involve Bayesian ideas.
Got it. And then as I searched about your background, your works online, I feel like the word cognitive modeling appears a lot of times.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and it seems like a big part of your research. And could you explain what it is in a simple term for our listeners who might be not familiar with?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think of cognitive science as an empirical science, like the other empirical sciences, like experimental physics or experimental biology, where the idea is to build models that describe and explain and predict the phenomena you're interested in. So if you took a different empirical science, something like astronomy, their goal would be to describe how the planets move through the sky and to explain why the planets move like that, gravitational forces and so on, and to be able to make predictions, where will the moon be in 3 days or something. So our phenomena are not how the planets move, our phenomena are how people make decisions or reason or relate to each other, the sort of properties, the phenomena of psychology, but our goals are the same. It's to describe the sorts of decisions that people make or how their memory works or how they interact with others, to explain why they do it like that. It has to do with their memory capacity or the decision-making biases they have or what they've learned in the past, and to be able to make predictions so that if we gave people this sort of task, they would perform this way, or if we intervened in some way, how would that affect people's cognition? So the idea is always through some mixture of theory and experiments to develop these models that are capable of describing what we see people do, explaining why they do that, and be able to make predictions about what might happen in the future or in different situations.
Got it. And I think you've already touched base on that, but I wonder how can this cognitive modeling or the computational modeling you've mentioned, it can help us understand humans' behavior, especially in the AI's context.
Yes, so that's been an interesting part of this workshop. I haven't thought very much before about human AI teaming, and this workshop's given me the opportunity to think about it. I think one thing that's maybe true is that in any relationship, people change and adapt. This is true of all human relationships, and it's probably also true of when humans are teamed with artificial intelligence or artificially intelligent agents in some form. And I think cognitive models, especially through that predictive capability, provide us with an opening to understand how people might make different decisions in the context of being paired with an artificially intelligent agent. So if a referee in a sport game or something now has artificial intelligence that is also contributing to the decision making or the officiating of that game, how might the referee's decision change? And you need a model of cognition to do that. You need an understanding of what sort of decisions the referee makes, why they make those decisions, and a prediction about how they'll make those decisions differently in a different context, where that context is now that they've been partnered with a machine or with some non-human decision-making agent. So I think that's the role of cognitive modeling that I've been focused on here.
That sounds amazing. And then, as you mentioned, cognitive science is like empirical science, where I know you can leverage a lot of real-world data inside to build a cognitive model. And then what are the challenges that arise after you build those theoretical models and then back to applying that into the practical real world?
So I see real world as an opportunity more than a problem. I think I'm a big fan of what's sometimes called solution-driven science, which is where on at the beginning of your research project, you look in the real world for inspiration on the sort of problems you should be solving back in university. This is different from applied research. Applied research is when people inside universities already know how something works and they see an application of that to the real world, but they already know how to solve it. Solution-driven is more, there's a problem out in the real world, but we don't know how to solve it, and we need to bring it back into the university and do basic research. So that's part of the goal here, and part of what comes with that, as you mentioned, is naturally occurring data. I'm also a big fan of this. I think a lot of psychology data is collected in controlled experiments, which absolutely have their uses, but they also mean that you're not quite collecting behavior as it happens in the real world, and there's something that's inherently valid and compelling about real world behavior. So I guess I have a preference where if I was studying something like people's preferences, I would rather study the shopping they do at the local supermarket where they're showing their preferences and their decision making, rather than putting them in an artificial task and training them up on, I don't know, random aliens or something that's contrived and looking at their decision making there. But you're right that brings challenges. When you collect naturally occurring data, you don't have the experimental control, so sometimes data are missing, or you can't collect them in every condition that you would like to collect them in. For me, again, that's just an opportunity to develop models that are robust and generalizable. I guess it's also one of the reasons I mentioned the Bayesian statistical thing at the beginning. Bayesian statistics turns out, I think, to be one really powerful way to deal with that missing data or incomplete data or data at large scale or small scale. You know, the lack of control you have over the sort of data that are now available to you, Bayesian statistical methods handle very well in terms of providing an interface between your model's predictions and the data that you have.
Got it. That's so interesting. And then when you're designing all those like AI systems that work alongside with human, and what are the key factors that ensures AI complements human strengths, especially in the team setting? And then how can cognitive models guide that process?
So one of the things we've been doing at this workshop, and we were just discussing it before I came here, was to try and identify where it is that humans and artificially intelligent agents have complementary strengths and weaknesses, because that seems to be the key to teaming, that you now have even within human teams often work best in, say, wisdom of the crowd or collective intelligence settings when you have a diversity of people within the team. And I think having artificial systems is just an opportunity to increase that diversity even further. So one of the key things would be to work out where the artificial systems might have diverse abilities that are beyond what people can do and complement. So one of those might be, for example, having a sort of encyclopedic knowledge of all of the facts that can be maintained in a working memory at any time, so that they've got the answer to every question immediately if this was just a matter of maintaining the fact base, whereas people at some point can't know all of these things perfectly and bring them all to mind in an error-free way immediately. And then I think the role of cognitive modeling within that would be the one I mentioned at the beginning, to try and make predictions about how people will behave differently in this different circumstance. So if they know that there's a memory aid, they have an artificial system that will contribute the fact base, how could people now not worry about trying to learn all of those facts because they know that this capability is part of their decision-making team? What else might they focus on? Might they focus on things that require more abstraction or more creativity or more about reading the social emotion of a situation? I think these are all really open and interesting research questions, but ultimately we'll need cognitive models to be able to make predictions about how people would behave if this was the way the AI looked, or if this was the way the AI looked, because that's the way we could optimize the overall team. We have to understand how people will change as a function of the team that they're in, and that requires a predictive cognitive model.
Got it. I'm already excited to see how it will develop in the future. So looking ahead, where do you see the cognitive modeling might have the biggest impact in the next decade? And are there any areas or industries where the cognitive modeling could lead to some surprising breakthroughs through or like unexpected applications?
One exciting thing that's happened throughout my career is when I started there weren't so many naturally occurring behavior data sets like the types I was talking about. So if you think about things like every time you go shopping, that's being logged by the supermarket that you're shopping at. And this is a rich source of human behavior. You're making all of these decisions under constraints with in varying contexts. You make very different shopping decisions when you're hungry versus when you're not hungry, and so on. And different people have different preferences, and people have different budgets, and so on. There's all sorts of interesting opportunities to understand human decision-making and preferences and so on in those sorts of data. And they've become available in the last 10 or 20 years in a rich way. Often because we're carrying around these smartphones that record all of our behavior all of the time and give access to it, but also just because the world's become more digitized and connected, so that human behavior every time you take an Uber ride or go shopping or whatever it is now available. So I see a big possibility for cognitive models to be able to analyze those rich, naturally occurring behavioral data sources to provide both practical benefits. So you could imagine that the supermarkets or Uber really care about consumer insights through having cognitive models that understand you've got different sorts of users with different preferences, and here's what they look like and here's how they behave. This is really useful commercially. But I think it also, and maybe this is the most important thing for an academic, asks and provides the opportunity to get deep answers into basic questions about what are the structures of human preferences, how stable are they, what are the individual differences between people, what do those individual differences depend upon in terms of background or experience or feedback, how might we change or adjust those preferences or decision-making styles or biases, and so on. So I think all of these questions can now be answered with data that are real-world behavior and are done at scale, both across the volume of decisions we have and the number of people who are incorporated. And we can do all of this in complex and dynamic real-world environments. So yeah, it's an exciting time to be a computational cognitive scientist who studies decision making.
Yeah, definitely. And just to wrap up, what is one key takeaway that you hope our listeners could gain from our today's conversation or what you have just shared about?
So when I talked about the astronomy example at the beginning, presumably astronomers, I'm not an astronomer, but presumably astronomers rely heavily upon theories of physics when they do this, the gravitational theories and so on. In exactly the same way, these sort of data that I've been discussing, like the shopping data or the ride-sharing data, these fundamentally these are psychological phenomena, and their analysis should be driven by psychological theories. So one thing I would love to see happen in the future is that cognitive scientists grab back some of this from statisticians or machine learning or other people who have been analyzing these data. It would be great to see that psychological theories start to play a key role in the analysis of what are inherently psychological data. Rather than treating these as statistical problems, I would treat them as cognitive modeling problems, because I think that provides the right level of insight and interpretability and understanding to move human society forward.
Michael, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. To our listeners, you can explore these topics further by visiting our website at www.cmu.edu/AI-SDN, where you can also submit questions for future guests. Don't forget to subscribe for more discussions on how AI shapes our society. Join us next time on AI in Real Life, Real Talk with Real Experts. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to having you with us again.